Welcome, everyone. Today we journey back to a time when Rome was not yet an empire, but just one of many powers vying for dominance in Italy. Long before Caesar and the legions marched across continents, Rome had to fight for survival, against hardened foes like the Samnites. In this episode, we'll explore the Battle of Mount Gaurus, one of the earliest major engagements of the First Samnite War. Around 343 BC, on the rugged slopes of a volcanic mountain, Roman legions met the fierce hill warriors of Samnium in a brutal clash. It wasn't just a battle, it was an early test of Rome's ambition, discipline, and destiny. By the early 4th century BC, Rome's territorial expansion had extended southward as far as the river Liris, which marked the boundary between Latium, the homeland of the Latins, and Campania. Today, this river is known as the Garigliano and forms the modern border between the regions of Lazio and Campania. In antiquity, the term Campania referred to the fertile plain that stretched from the river Liris down to the bays of Naples and Salerno, lying between the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Apennine Mountains. The northern part of Campania was home to several small peoples, including the Sidicini, Aurunci, and Ausoni. Further south, the region was inhabited by the Campanians, a group originally descended from the Samnites. Although closely related to the Samnites in origin, the Campanians had developed a distinct cultural and political identity over time. The Samnites themselves were a powerful confederation of 4 tribes who lived in the mountainous interior east of Campania and were regarded as the dominant force in the region during this period. The peoples of Campania, including the Samnites, Campanians, and Sidicini, shared a common linguistic heritage, all speaking dialects of the Oscan language, which was widespread throughout central and southern Italy. In the first half of the 4th century BC, the Samnites, who controlled the rugged Apennine Mountains in central Italy, began to move southward, coming into contact with the fertile plains of Campania. Recognizing the richness of the land, the Samnites decided to expand their territory by attacking the city-states of Campania. According to the historian Livy, the conflict that became known as the First Samnite War was triggered when the Samnites attacked the Sidicini, a tribe located to the north of Campania, with their principal settlement at Teanum Sidicinum. The Sidicini, unable to defend themselves against the Samnites, sought assistance from the Campanians. However, the Samnites proved victorious in a battle fought within Sidicine territory. They then turned their focus toward the rest of Campania. The Samnites first captured the Tifata Hills, which overlooked the city of Capua, and established a stronghold there. With this position secured, they marched down into the plains between the hills and Capua. In a second battle, the Samnites defeated the Campanians once again, forcing them to retreat behind their city walls. Faced with this growing threat, the Campanians appealed to Rome for assistance, marking the beginning of Roman involvement in the conflict. To fully understand the Samnite involvement in Campania, it is necessary to look back to an earlier period. Both the ancient historians Diodorus Siculus and Livy mention that in 354 BC, Rome and the Samnites concluded a formal treaty. However, neither source provides details about the specific terms of the agreement. Based on the broader historical context, modern historians have suggested that the treaty likely established the river Liris as the boundary between the 2 powers' respective spheres of influence, Rome to the north of the river and the Samnites to the south. If this interpretation is correct, then the Samnites would have had a legitimate claim, according to the treaty, to assert control over lands south of the Liris, including parts of Campania. This perspective helps explain the Samnites' southward expansion as a move consistent with the earlier diplomatic agreement, at least from their point of view. In 343 BC, as the Samnite threat intensified, the city of Capua, one of the most prominent centers in Campania, sent envoys to Rome to request an alliance. The Campanian ambassadors were granted an audience with the Roman Senate, where they delivered a carefully crafted appeal. In their speech, the ambassadors proposed a formal alliance between Rome and the Campanians, emphasizing the strategic value of Campania's famed wealth and resources. They argued that Campanian support could strengthen Rome's position, particularly in its ongoing struggles against the Volsci, a long-standing enemy. The envoys also pointed out that Rome's existing treaty with the Samnites did not explicitly prohibit the formation of new alliances, such as one with Campania. They warned that if Rome declined their offer, the Samnites would inevitably conquer Campania, and its considerable strength would then be added to Samnium's rather than Rome's. Despite the compelling argument, Rome was hesitant to act. At the time, the Republic had recently entered into an alliance with the Samnites, largely driven by shared interests in campaigning against Etruria in the north and focusing on the looming threat of Celtic incursions. As a result, Rome was reluctant to jeopardize its arrangement with Samnium and chose not to immediately intervene. After careful deliberation, the Roman Senate acknowledged that an alliance with the Campanians could offer significant advantages. The fertile lands of Campania had the potential to serve as a vital source of grain for Rome, enhancing the Republic's food security and economic strength. However, the Senate also recognized that accepting such an alliance would be incompatible with the spirit of their existing treaty with the Samnites. To preserve Rome's reputation as a faithful and honorable partner, the Senate ultimately decided to reject the Campanian proposal. Following this refusal, the Campanian ambassadors, acting in accordance with the instructions they had received before departing, took a dramatic step. They formally surrendered the people of Campania and the city of Capua unconditionally to Rome. This act placed them under Roman protection and authority. Deeply moved by this voluntary surrender, the Roman Senate determined that Rome's honor was now at stake. Since Capua and the Campanians had become, in effect, Roman subjects, it was Rome's duty to defend them against aggression. As a result, the Senate resolved that Rome would intervene to protect Campania from further Samnite attacks, setting the stage for the First Samnite War. In response to the Campanian surrender, the Roman Senate dispatched envoys to the Samnites with a formal request. The envoys were instructed to remind the Samnites of their existing friendship and alliance with Rome, and to ask them to refrain from attacking territory that had now come under Roman authority. Specifically, they were warned not to harm the city of Capua or the wider region of Campania. The Roman delegation delivered this message before the Samnite National Assembly. According to Livy, the Samnites responded defiantly, not only refusing the request, but openly declaring their intention to wage war against Capua. Livy further claims that, in the presence of the Roman envoys, the Samnite magistrates left the chamber and immediately ordered their forces to march into Campanian territory and begin ravaging it. This dramatic account, however, is likely an embellishment by Livy, intended to cast Rome's decision to go to war in a more favorable light. Regardless of how the events unfolded, diplomatic ties quickly unraveled. Both Rome and Samnium abandoned their alliance, and hostilities commenced, marking the beginning of the First Samnite War. The historical reliability of Livy's account of the First Samnite War has been questioned by modern historians. While many scholars acknowledge that Livy likely simplified the complex series of events that led the Sidicini, Campani, and Samnites into conflict, they generally accept that the broad outline of his narrative may reflect historical reality. Strategically, the Sidicini held a strong position at Taenum, a settlement located at a key regional crossroads. Control of this location would have given the Samnites a clear motive for conquest. It is plausible, as Livy suggests, that the First Samnite War began somewhat unintentionally. The Sidicini were situated south of the river Liris within the Samnite sphere of influence. Furthermore, the treaty between Rome and Samnium may have only applied to the middle stretch of the Liris, not its lower course, where the Sidicini were located. This geographic detail suggests that Rome was not particularly concerned with the Sidicini's fate and had no initial reason to intervene in the conflict. What drew Rome into the war was not the Samnite campaign against the Sidicini, but rather the unexpected involvement of the Campani, whose surrender to Rome transformed a local conflict into a broader war between Rome and Samnium. Many modern historians have questioned the historical accuracy of Livy's account of the Campanian embassy to Rome, particularly his claim that the Campani surrendered themselves in the city of Capua unconditionally into Roman possession. At the time, Capua was one of the wealthiest cities in Italy, and it seems unlikely that after only 2 military defeats, such a prosperous city would have been reduced to such desperation that it would willingly give up its independence. This skepticism is further supported by later events. During the Second Punic War, Capua famously defected to the side of Carthage, suggesting that its loyalty to Rome may not have been as deeply rooted or long-standing as Livy's version implies. Based on these observations, the historian E.T. Salmon argued that the story of the Campanian surrender in 343 BC was likely a later invention by Roman historians. According to this view, the tale served a dual purpose. It excused Rome's breach of its treaty with the Samnites in 343 BC and justified Rome's harsh punishment of Capua in 211 BC for its support of Hannibal. However, not all scholars agree. Historian T.J. Cornell accepts Livy's version of the surrender as plausible, pointing out that voluntary submission was a common diplomatic practice in the ancient world. In this context, the Campanian surrender may have been a strategic move to gain Roman protection, rather than a complete loss of autonomy. Livy presents Rome's intervention on behalf of the Campani as a noble and selfless act, a narrative consistent with the broader theme in Roman Republican histories that sought to portray all Roman wars as just and defensive. Such portrayals reflect the values of Roman aristocratic culture, where military success was the primary path to personal prestige and political advancement. Roman historians, writing centuries later, often shaped their narratives to reflect these ideals. However, evidence from later, better documented periods shows that the Roman Senate was perfectly capable of using diplomacy to justify expansionist wars. There is little reason to assume this kind of strategic behavior did not also exist in the second half of the 4th century BC. Furthermore, there are known cases where Rome rejected appeals for assistance, suggesting that in 343 BC, the Senate had the option to decline the Campanians' plea. Their decision to intervene, therefore, may have been driven more by strategic interests than by a sense of obligation or altruism. According to Livy, in the year 343 BC, the beginning of the First Samnite War, Rome dispatched both of its consuls, Marcus Valerius Corvus and Aulus Cornelius Cassius Arvina, to lead military campaigns against the Samnites. Valerius advanced into Campania, while Cornelius marched into the mountainous region of Samnium, establishing his camp near the town of Saticula. The Samnites, expecting the main conflict to unfold in Campania, had concentrated a large force there and were eager for battle. Livy reports that the Romans went on to achieve 3 significant victories over the Samnites during the campaign. The first major engagement took place at the foot of Mount Gaurus, where Consul Valerius had positioned his forces. This battle marked the beginning of Rome's military success in the war and helped to establish their presence in Campania. After several days of minor skirmishes to probe the enemy's strength, Consul Marcus Valerius Corvus judged that the time had come for a full-scale engagement. The Roman army broke camp and advanced toward the Samnite positions. As the morning mist lifted from the mountain slopes, the Roman army moved forward in tight, disciplined ranks, their shields interlocked and spears ready. The Samnites, more accustomed to fighting in irregular formations suited to their mountainous homeland, were also prepared for the clash. Then the two armies advanced, and the battle began. The clash was brutal and evenly matched. Javelins filled the air in the opening volleys, followed by the grinding noise of shields smashing into spears. On both sides, men fought fiercely, each side determined to gain control over the fertile plains of Campania. The Roman legions held their lines with discipline, but the Samnites responded with fierce, unrelenting charges. For a long time, neither side could gain the upper hand. The clash at the foot of Mount Gaurus had ground into a brutal deadlock. The disciplined Roman infantry and the fiercely determined Samnites were locked in formation, neither side yielding an inch. Dust and blood filled the air as spear points glittered under the Campanian sun, and the thunder of iron on shields echoed through the valley. Consul Marcus Valerius Corvus watched from his position near the center of the Roman line, his eyes scanning the enemy ranks. The Samnites were holding firm, too firm. The Roman phalanx had pushed, probed, and pressed, but the enemy refused to break. Hoping to shatter their formation and break the stalemate, Valerius ordered his cavalry forward. In a thunderous charge, Roman horsemen slammed into the Samnite front, but it was no use. Cramped between the lines and unable to maneuver, they found no opening. Their momentum stalled. Lances splintered harmlessly on shields. Unable to penetrate the wall of spears, the cavalry wheeled around, their charge a wasted effort. Valerius scowled as he watched the horsemen retreat. He knew what had to be done. Without hesitation, he dismounted. The consul strode to the front ranks of the infantry, dust clinging to his greaves, his sword drawn and gleaming. He raised his voice above the noise of battle, shouting so all could hear, "Soldiers! This task belongs to us now, the infantry. I will not ask you to go where I will not lead. Watch me. Wherever I carve a path through the enemy lines, follow. Cut down every man in front of you. Soon, where now you see a wall of spears, there will be only the corpses of the fallen." At his signal, the Roman cavalry peeled off to the flanks, making room in the center. A tense silence fell over the legionaries. Then Valerius raised his sword high and charged. He struck the first Samnite warrior head-on, the clash of iron sharp and sudden. One stroke was enough. The enemy fell, and with a roar, the Roman soldiers surged after their consul. Line after line of legionaries smashed into the Samnites with shields forward and spears drawn. Steel met bronze. Men grappled, stumbled, shouted in defiance. The Samnites fought stubbornly, refusing to yield ground despite the fresh assault. But the Romans had been inspired. They pressed in with a fury, stabbing their way forward through grit and gore. One by one, the Samnites began to fall, not for lack of courage, but because they could not match the relentless momentum of the Roman countercharge. Blood stained the dry Campanian earth. The valley that had been shimmering with spear points was now choked with the bodies of the dead and dying. The Samnites began to falter. Their lines bent. Rome was turning the tide. Victory was not yet complete, but the initiative had swung decisively. The consul's charge shattered the deadlock, and for the first time, the Romans could sense victory within their grasp. The sun had begun to sink behind the Campanian hills, casting long shadows over the battlefield at the foot of Mount Gaurus. The air was thick with dust and the stench of blood. Roman and Samnite corpses lay in tangled heaps, especially around the Samnite standards, where the fiercest fighting had raged for hours. Despite the relentless Roman assaults, the Samnites still held their ground. They neither broke ranks nor wavered. Their dead lay shoulder to shoulder, but still they fought on, grim, silent, and determined that death would come before surrender. No banner had fallen, no warrior fled. It was as if the Samnites had resolved that the earth would drink every drop of their blood before they yielded an inch. But on the Roman side, the hours of bitter fighting had begun to show. The weight of their armor and the unending clash of spear and shield had drained their strength. Many were gasping for breath, their arms sluggish, their legs heavy. Fatigue gnawed at them, and with dusk descending, some feared the enemy might outlast them. Then something changed. A fury born of frustration took hold. It spread like a spark through dry grass, rage at the stubbornness of the Samnites, anger at the deadlock, and a primal need to end the fight. With a roar that seemed to come from the very soul of Rome, the legions launched one final, savage assault. There was no formation, no calculated maneuver, only a mad, all-consuming charge. The Romans hurled themselves at the Samnite line like a storm. Their eyes glowed with something terrible and inhuman. Their faces were wild, contorted with exhaustion and fury like the visages of men possessed. And at last the Samnites wavered. One by one their lines bent, then buckled. Some turned to flee, others threw down their weapons. The Roman swords found new strength, cutting down enemy after enemy. Panic swept the Samnites like a plague. Soon prisoners were being dragged from the chaos, and bodies fell in droves. It was no longer a battle, it was a rout. Had the sun not slipped beneath the horizon, the entire Samnite force might have been annihilated. But night cloaked the battlefield, ending the slaughter. Darkness saved what little remained of the Samnite army. Even the Romans, hardened as they were, admitted they had never faced such a stubborn foe. When captured, Samnites were later asked what finally broke them. They did not speak of numbers or tactics. They spoke of fear, of the Romans' eyes, which had burned like fire, and their faces, which looked like madmen. It was not strength of arms that unmade them, they said, but the sight of something terrifying in the Roman soul. That night, the Samnites fled under cover of darkness. By dawn, their camp was empty. The Roman legions advanced without resistance and took possession of it. Soon after, the citizens of Capua arrived, men, women, even children, streaming out to greet the victors. Cheers echoed across the plain, and the exhausted Romans were welcomed not just as warriors, but as saviors. Modern historians are generally skeptical about the accuracy of Livy's account of the Battle of Mount Gaurus. They argue that little, if any, of the detail he provides comes from reliable contemporary records. Instead, Livy's descriptions of battles from this early period are widely considered to be literary reconstructions, crafted either by him or by his sources, rather than factual reports. The Battle of Mount Gaurus, in particular, would have been especially prone to such embellishment, as it marked the first recorded clash between the Romans and the Samnites. Claims of heavy Samnite casualties are likely exaggerated, and the heroic role assigned to Marcus Valerius Corvus may also have been inflated over time. Furthermore, modern scholars point out that the idea of nightfall halting the fighting, a detail often repeated in Roman historical narratives, was sometimes used to obscure less decisive outcomes or to conceal Roman setbacks. While Livy's account of the Battle of Mount Gaurus offers a vivid narrative, modern historians urge caution, viewing much of it as literary reconstruction rather than factual history. The true scale, location, and outcome of the battle remain uncertain, but what is clear is that Rome's clash with Samnium in 343 BC marked the beginning of a long and defining rivalry, one that would soon continue at the Battle of Saticula.